episode of the More Than a Game podcast. It's a special episode today because not only are we entering into our 5th year of the podcast with this very episode, but we're also joined by a member of the Australian Basketball Hall of Fame, Damian Keogh. Damian's had an incredible career to date, most notably with the Sydney Kings, and as a former captain of the Kings, his time in Sydney led to him being named in the 25th anniversary team for the Sydney Kings back in 2013. During that time, he also represented Australia at 3 Olympics and 3 Basketball World Cups. And since finishing his professional basketball career, he's transitioned well into corporate life, currently serving as the chairman and CEO of the Hoyts Group. Well, it's a true pleasure to have him on the podcast today. So, Damian Keogh, welcome to the More Than a Game podcast.
Thanks very much, Dan. Great to be here.
Great to have you on, mate. And before we get into your life and story, I just wanted to touch base on the recent news coming out of Sydney. And your old club, the Sydney Kings, has recently appointed the GOAT, Brian Goorjian, as their new head coach. What are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, great appointment. I sent a note to Paul Smith congratulating on him. And I think, obviously the Kings have had great success winning the past 2 championships. And then this year, to be honest, they were a bit disjointed in the way they played. So I think it's a great appointment for the Kings. And yeah, gorgeous record. It can't be disputed. And he really put a punctuation on it, securing that first ever Olympic bronze medal a few years ago as well. So
Absolutely.
Really excited. And it's just been fantastic the last few years to see the resurgence of the NBL in particular and the Sydney Kings.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll get into the resurgence very soon, but what a career you've had, mate. You've obviously captained the Kings, as I said, over 400 NBL games, 3 Olympics, 3 World Cups, NBL, Basketball Australia, New South Wales Basketball Hall of Fame. It's a list as long as my arm, I tell you. Order of Australia for your work in sport and community. Former chairman of the Cronulla Sharks NRL side, chairman and CEO of Hoyts. When you hear all of that, what are you most proud of looking back on your career so far?
Well, I don't look back a lot, to be honest. I mean, it's ages since I played. I retired in 1995. In fact, I think I was very fortunate coming through the NBL when I did in the early 80s. I got a university degree at Melbourne University. We pretty much worked a fair bit of the way through my career doing different things and developing different skills, which helped for life after basketball. But that period from 1988 through to I finished in 1995 was relatively professional, and incredible to think when I was growing up that I could play professional basketball domestically in Australia. And then you look forward now, 25, 30 years on, and the NBA is littered with Australian-born basketball players. So really proud to see the way the sport has evolved, and very thankful for the opportunities it's given me through my playing days and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take you back to when you first started. I love taking the guests back to when they were probably growing up, dreaming about being a professional, but also starting out in the sport. Can you remember that time and what that looked like for you?
Yeah, I can remember it very vividly. I grew up in Melbourne, eastern suburbs Melbourne, which I guess was an incredible hotbed of basketball talent dating back some time. And I started as a 10-year-old in 1972, and it happened to coincide with the Munich Olympics and following the fortunes of the Australian basketball team and discovering that basketball was an Olympic sport, and that the Olympics had been in Melbourne in 1956. My father had played in a demonstration game of AFL on the MCG, believe it or not, against Lindsay Gaze, Andrew Gaze's father, in a demonstration game, and he had the old Olympic jumper with the rings. And the Olympics meant a lot to me. I was playing a lot of AFL at the time, but certainly basketball was a way I could realise those Olympic dreams.
That's awesome. So you had a junior career in Melbourne, as you said, made your debut with the Natarwing Spectres back in 1981. Having spent all those hours on the court trying to get your craft up to a level to make it in the NBL, what are your recollections of that time actually getting your debut in the NBL?
Yeah, well, I grew up playing with the Vermont Vultures in the Nunawading area, and had a very fortunate junior career. I played in 5 national junior championships with Victoria and never lost a game. And they were fantastic tournaments. Played junior Australian teams, and then now the NBL started in 1980, and I went along and watched. I can still remember watching the NBL in those days, and you know, to be on the court the following year, and part of that. And the old Nunawading Stadium, where we used to run out of the change room to the Rocky theme, and it was normally a bit of a packed house. And Barry Barnes was coaching it, and we had some great players. Then I played with Bill Palmer back in the day, Alan Black, Gary Fox, Peter Stacker, Chuck Harmison. They were great times, and we played in the finals basically from 1980 through to 1984, my last year there. Lost a grand final in 1981 to Launceston in Adelaide, but it was just a great time. And obviously the NBL had just started. We were still playing in tin sheds, traveling around on, playing usually Saturday and Sundays back in those times. Everyone was working, but it was obviously the start of something exciting.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. You were obviously right at the start of everything for the NBL. You went into you went to play for the Sydney Kings, obviously, which we'll touch on, but just reflecting on those times throughout the late 80s into the 90s where basketball was this huge, all over your TV screens and advertisements everywhere. We spoke about the resurgence now. Some of the guests that I've had on tend to think that we're actually coming into a period, or the golden era very much now, in Australian basketball. So what are your recollections of that time compared to where the sport is in its present day?
Well, it was a slow burn. So you could see back in the early 80s when it was taking off in some of the smaller regional towns. I think Bob Turner was in Newcastle. It took off there. He went to Canberra. They won back-to-back in 83, 84. It was getting bigger. And then they started building the bigger indoor venues. So the Glass House was probably the big step up in Melbourne. We moved from Albert Park and Nunawading Stadium and Coburg Stadium into those bigger venues. I got up to Sydney in 1985 playing with Bankstown Bruins, and the State Sports Centre had just been built. So there was a lot of colliding factors. And then really in the late 80s, you had this kind of NBA impact on Australia. Michael Jordan was the #1 athlete. Bigger venues built again. We started playing in the Sydney Entertainment Centre. Brisbane were playing in Boondall. So, yeah, it certainly erupted. There was a lot of good promotion. I mean, at the time, AFL was really played on a Saturday, NRL on a Sunday. They didn't have a lot of lights at their venues, so they didn't play at night time as we did. So we had a lot of clear air in that kind of evening winter sport. And with these venues that have been built, the promotion and marketing was great. And the standard of the game just lifted. I mean, every year through those 80s, we were signing new contracts. And the money was just going up and up. I mean, it was up and up from like 1,500 to 5,000 to 10,000 to 20 to 40 to, so it kept on going up. So there was a collective motivation in the league of trying to make the league better. And I think when I look at the NBL now and the convergence of factors, the NBA is certainly at a high in terms of the talent and the players, the Australian players in there, as I mentioned. And hats off, obviously, to Larry Kesselman, Paul Smith, the other owners of the teams, putting in the time and effort. And then I think the players the Australian players and the imports are really proud of the league. They're happy to try and grow the league, and it just feels like there's upward positive momentum, which is so important in sport.
Absolutely. Do you still get along to the games and check it out?
Yeah, look, I haven't been to as many this recent season, but I get out when I can to the games. I do enjoy it. Summer's a busy time and holidays and different commitments and whatnot, but it's I miss the entertainment centre in the centre of CBD, but when you get out to Homebush, it is Kudos Bank Arena is a great arena, and the standard of the presentation and the games is first class.
Absolutely, sure is. Well, let's move into that now with the Sydney Kings, and it's going gangbusters in terms of the crowds, and as you said, winning 2 NBL championships. I want to take you back to when it sort of started to evolve into the brand it is today. Being in the corporate life now with Hoyts, obviously all across branding and all that. It is such a famous brand in Australian sport, the Sydney Kings. And when you think about, as you said, starting off from the Bankstown Bruins into the West Sydney Slammers, I think they became, then into the Sydney Kings. I mean, such an evolution of the Kings brand. And reflecting back on those times, what do you think was the key ingredient that, I guess, made it flourish and become the brand it is today?
Yeah, it was interesting. I did move up to Sydney in 1985. And to be honest, at the time, the two Sydney teams weren't performing that well, and basketball certainly wasn't as advanced probably in Sydney as it was in Melbourne. And the Kings formed in 1988, and we started building a pretty good crowd and brand. And then really when we moved to the entertainment centre in 1990, it took off in a big way. And a lot of that is really due to obviously Mike Wroblewski, who was the owner of the Kings at the time, and his directors, Andrew Lazarus and others. Bob Turner came to the club. He was a great promoter of sport and basketball, Bob, and a great marketer. Lorraine landed from an administration perspective. So there were a lot of forces there. And also Sydney was the big end of town. So once we started playing in the heart of Sydney, I think at one stage the Kings had 80-odd courtside boxes sold with all the big corporates from around the country. So, as you say, I can remember back in the day, we did Tooheys beer ads. With Dwayne McLean, we did a McDonald's ad. We did Brad, Dalton, Tim and I did a Diet Coke ad. Like it was pretty unbelievable. I even did a Tip Top bread ad with my mother and Leroy Loggins at one stage. So
there you go.
Yeah.
Wow. I remember those ads. They were special. They were very good.
So it certainly promoted the profile of basketball. And, this is pre-pay television and pre-internet. So basketball's competitive edge was pretty solid then.
Yeah, 100%. Well, it's such a great brand now, as I said. And speaking of the Sydney Kings, a man we're both familiar with, BJ Carter, named as the recent recipient of the Ring of Honour. So congrats to BJ. It was a great honour, no doubt. But obviously in those times you captained the Kings. It also led to you representing Australia at 3 Olympic Games and 3 Basketball World Cups, which was no doubt a great honour for yourself. Being an Olympic year, what was your favourite Olympic Games that you went to? I'm guessing your first one, but what is it that makes the Olympic Games so special for those of us who have always dreamed of being there but haven't got there? What's it all about?
Yeah, look, it certainly was for me in 1984. I was fortunate enough to get selected. We played in Los Angeles, and it was a great experience. And the team did okay, but at the time there was a major gap between us and the better countries around the world. So I think when I look back at the 3 campaigns I did, 1988 in Seoul, we played off for a medal. We were able to beat Spain in the quarterfinal, and that was when you had a nucleus of senior players led by Phil Smythe, Larry Sengstock, Ray Borner, Wayne Carroll, Andrew Gaze at his peak of his powers, and then you had Luke Longley, Andrew Vlahov, and Mark Bradkey coming through, the 3 young guys. And we just had a great team spirit and focus at those games. And to compete for a medal for the first time ever, for me, was very special. And for me also, probably the contribution I was able to make to that team. I led the scoring in the game against the eventual gold medalist Soviet Union, which was a bit of a highlight. And then, 1992 was in Barcelona, which was a great games as well. And we had a star-studded team, a lot of the players I just mentioned, and then you had Leroy Loggins joined us as well. But it was a much more highly competitive environment because Soviet Union and Yugoslavia had broken up. So you had Lithuania, you had Russia, you had Serbia, you had Croatia. So it was a very, very tough games, and we were a bit up and down in our form in that. But I mean, that gap from my first World Cup in 1982 in Colombia, where we actually finished 5th. But I do remember as a 20-year-old playing there that being out on the court, we played the US and the Soviets. In fact, Doc Rivers, who's obviously back coaching Milwaukee now. We played the US, and he was from Marquette at the time, and the guys still remember when he put his foot on my forehead when he was dunking at one stage on a breakaway dunk. But we were just a long way behind at the time. And what the NBL did, and the AIS, and players going to college and more experience, that gap bridged quite quickly. So, in that 6 years till 1988, we felt like we really belonged on the court with the best teams in the world. And full credit to the administrators who built the NBL and created that tough domestic league, which is, now one of the best in the world, and helps us at that international level. But, playing for Australia was always, it was absolute highlight. And I feel very fortunate for the opportunities there. And, the coaches that I had in the Australian teams, Lindsay Gaze, Adrian Hurley, Barry Barnes, great mentors and great experience, which carries on in life and business and other things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to, you mentioned Leroy Loggins, and obviously one of the greats of Australian basketball, NBL. I remember watching a documentary of Andrew Gaze, and there was footage of those tournaments, and you hear about this culture that the Boomers have, but you could see it just in glimpses of those videos, just how tight-knit the guys are. So what do you put that down to? Like, obviously the mateship that we have in Australian psyche, but what makes it so special, and what makes people want to play for the Boomers?
Yeah, look, I'm a director and investor in a production company, and we released a movie called Rose Gold last year, which was largely based on that bronze medal, and it took back a little bit of that history of the Boomers and some of the disappointments, and it was so good to see them have that triumph. And if anyone wants to watch that, I think it's on ABC iView. It's certainly worth a watch if you haven't seen it. But
definitely.
Look, I think it was exciting for me, like just being a proud Australian and growing up with our Olympic triumph and international triumphs in different sports, and I guess the Anzac kind of legends and those kind of things. We always, when we were younger, playing for Australia was just such a feather in the cap, and we didn't have that high level domestic competition until the NBL. So, I think that camaraderie and the value system, and you look at some of the leaders of certainly the teams I played in, and the Larry Sengstocks, the Phil Smyths, that was then carried through by people like Andrew and Shane and different people, then on to Andrew Bogut, and then more recently Joe Ingles and Paddy Mills. I mean, that value system in terms of team first, of being proud of playing for your country and not wanting to let your mates down and do your best. And then you put that in an Olympic environment where, you're in a village together with all the other Australian competitors, and you're seeing people win gold medals, swimmers, rowers, whatever, and you can't help but be inspired and want to do your best. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
I'm certainly looking forward to the Olympics this year. I don't think it'll be easy for the Australian team. I feel we're kind of, while we've got a lot of NBA players, it feels to me we're a little bit in a changing of the guard environment. So maybe Joe and Paddy are, they're coming to the end of their time, and that question mark on whether the Josh Giddies, Josh Greens, these kind of guys can carry maybe Dante Exum can carry the team, and it's going to be tough. Olympics and World Championships in Europe are really tough.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, you've sort of echoed some of my concerns, I guess, with the aging roster on that part, the veterans, I guess. So time will tell. Hopefully they do well and get another medal for Australia. That would be fantastic. But moving back into, I guess, the time spent in the World Championships and World Cups, I guess your time correlated with Michael Jordan, as you said. And am I right in saying that at some point you would have shared the court with him in your Olympic Games? Is that right? Am I right in saying that?
No, unfortunately, I played it. We obviously with Hoyts last year, we had the Air movie, which was based on signing Michael Jordan to the Nike contract, and I used some of the motivation stuff of Michael Jordan for my staff in a presentation, and I led off with the fact that Michael Jordan and I have a few things in common. We're both Olympians. I said he's been to 2 Olympics, but I've been to 3. But he's won 2 gold medals and I didn't win any.
That's true.
Unfortunately, we didn't play them in '84
Right.
when he was on the team. And then
Wondering that.
probably a career disappointment for all of us is that we also didn't play them in 1992.
Yeah.
The dream team, but they were a massive sideshow in Barcelona. Wherever they went, they didn't stay in the Olympic Village. They were way too famous for that. But
Well,
in terms of where basketball was as a sport at the time, we were all riding off the coattails of Jordan, and he was. I can remember watching him in 1984 in the gold medal game. They played Spain, and he was on a breakaway. There was one guy between him and the basket, and he just paused, accelerated, took off, and did a dunk. And I just remember being in awe, going like, I didn't understand anyone with that physical prowess, the way he played. But I would have loved to have played against him, to be able to tell my kids or grandkids. And given that we probably played similar positions on the court, it might have been embarrassing, but it would have been a nice story associated with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you didn't get to play against MJ. Who was the greatest player you played against?
Well, we played the Dream Team in 1994 in the second Dream Team in Toronto at the World Championships. It was my final international tournament, and we were quite nervous going into that game. And they had Shaquille O'Neal, Sean Kemp, Kevin Johnson, Reggie Miller, so it was a pretty tidy team. And we actually, I think they only had maybe a single-figure lead at half time against us. And I remember in the second half they blew us out pretty badly. But yeah, I mean, probably, the two that come back to my mind who we played a lot against in the 80s and 90s would have been Drazen Petrovic, who played with Yugoslavia on those great teams. I think I remember in a Christmas Day or Boxing Day game in Paris in '87, holding him to 50.
Gosh, that's crazy.
He was something amazing. And then also Shroonis Marshalinas, who toured here a couple of times, ended up playing with the Golden State Warriors. He played with that Soviet Union team, which won the gold medal in 1988. Just great players. And we learnt a lot from particularly the Europeans and playing them. We had the Soviets tour twice in 1987 and 88 tour Australia. And remember I think it was 88, we were on the 4th game of a 5-day tour in maybe 7 days. And we'd flown to Adelaide, and we just tossed the balls out in the morning and shoot a few shots, do a few stretches. And the Soviets came in, we were playing that night, and they were putting each other on their shoulders and doing squat jumps up the stands and a whole lot of other exercise. And we just looked at them and goes, well, they're just at another level to where we were. So I think, that was something with the professionalism that came in through the NBL, and and I certainly was a beneficiary of it. The more professional I became, the better you became, and the more you train. But understanding just what those challenging yourself to increase those limits as a player. And I look back now, and with sports psychology, recovery, technology of weights and whatnot, the way people train, you'd be way better. And I think the game's come a long way. I look at video of back in the day when we played compared to the game today, and it's like snails playing, to be quite honest.
Yeah, that's right. 100%, absolutely. We mentioned about the sports science, but also the, challenging yourself to get better. It's a good transition into, your corporate life now, and the transferable skills you've taken from playing into your working career, because it's only a short period of time. People don't realise, compared to your life, it's only a snippet, playing professional sport for those who have that privilege and honour. So what have been those transferable skills that you've been able to transfer, and how have you been able to bring that into your role now as CEO of Hoyts? I'm guessing, trying to challenge yourself every day and in order to get better as a leader, as a colleague. What have been the most beneficial skills that you've learned or taken from the sport of basketball and taken into your corporate life now?
Yeah, look, I think the parallels between sport and business are probably greater now than ever before. Once upon a time in business, it was a very hierarchical management system as boss and worker, and this is what you do and how you do it. And it's a lot more collaborative these days, and a lot more coaching involved, and a lot more empowerment. I look back on I played 16 years in the NBL, and one of the things I really worked hard on was in the off season, and whether it be conditioning or working on skills and other kind of things. So I was kind of self-conditioned through that playing time, I guess, of a mentality of continuous learning and self-improvement and trying to get better. And I think in a corporate career or a business environment, nowadays, in particular with technology and other advancements, if you're not continuously learning and developing skills, then you're potentially in trouble. So that held me in really good stead. And then I think the other thing about competition, from an early age playing, and everyone who's played the game, but then you heighten the level to National League and Olympic Games and World Championships, and winning and losing, and the process associated with winning and losing, and in particularly performing. And that's where you come back really to process, structures, systems, and your rhythm of your business. And we certainly have a lot of disciplines around both the Hoyts Group and Val Morgan, the businesses that I run, and I've got 3,000 employees. We turn over $650 million a year, and you don't leave it up to chance. There's a lot of structure, there's a lot of strategy, there's a lot of organization, empowerment through that. You learn that, and then I think really being part of a team in team sport and going through those ups and downs, and I relate a lot now to teams I played on. I look at that 88 team fondly that we had in, that played off for a medal. And that was a team that probably maximised its ability, everyone playing to their roles and playing to their potential. And then at other times you had teams where you probably had a lot of talent that didn't all quite come together in terms of that performance. So I'm a very competitive person. I probably had to learn to curb some of my competitiveness, and not everyone's kind of wired the same way I am in terms of that. So you've got to relate to people. So no, it's interesting. I was very fortunate on the transition from sport to business, but a lot of it was due to the skills that I was able to develop through that time I was playing. I spent a lot of time in working in different things, spending a lot of time with sponsors and other people where I could learn off. So
for sure,
just doing that. So I've been very fortunate with that.
Absolutely. One of the things as we come to a close, I guess, is the word you use there, transition from professional sport into everyday working life. And you hear so many stories of athletes really struggling with that transition. I know this is something you've spoken about in different talks that you've had. I saw the Sydney Kings, I think you had an event there where you spoke about adapting to change and the importance of that. I guess it's a bit of a vogue term now because of going through COVID, and organisations, people have had to adapt to change. So as someone who has moved myself from Sydney to Perth and going through that process now, there's some important skills and I guess ingredients that we need to put in place when there is change afoot. But I guess it's important to realise that change is healthy, change is good for our growth and our development. So what are some of the learnings you've had from that transition from professional sport into corporate life, but also the importance of organisations adapting to change and constantly seeking to evolve?
Yeah, look, I think we talk a lot about change and a lot about innovation and ideas and ways that we can get better, and having that mentality of continual, not just learning, but continual growth in what you're doing. You're right about the corporate environment has changed a little bit, and COVID's altered some of that with more flexible working. We're spending a lot more time on, I guess, things with our employees that are helping them in, broader than just their business life, but in their life, and trying to create a culture of belonging and a culture of learning and a culture of acceptance. So, there's a lot going on in that space. I think there's also there's a bit of luck in what you do and how you do it, but it's one of those sayings I like is, the harder you work, the luckier you get. I've really enjoyed the corporate side of life. And I think with that basketball transition, probably the biggest thing there is that, and some of the players that I played with back in the day, they probably had a lot of time away from the court between training sessions that they chose to spend doing other things, hobbies or other bits and pieces. But, you need to prepare and work at skills and different things that are going to hold you in good stead.
Yeah, no, that's great. Very valuable. As we finish up, we did touch on the Boomers, but with the Olympics just around the corner, what do you think, or where do you think they're going to place this year?
Well, I think a lot depends on the draw. I think that's coming out in the next week or so, who they get. It is one of those things where you would like to see us at least get into a quarter-final game, and that's a top 8 finish. And, and when you look at the history of the Boomers at the Olympic Games, that quarter-final game is the real key one. You don't probably want to come up against the US in that one. I think a bit of it also depends which of the NBA players are going to play for the European teams. If Jokic is playing, they're going to be real tough. There's so many good players around. Look, I'd love to see them at least play off for a medal. But I think everything would have to go right for that to happen. And I think also for that to happen, we're going to need to see a breakout of someone beyond probably Paddy and Joe. And I'm just wondering who that person is at this stage. Is it a Josh Green? Is it a Dante? Duop Reese played some good games. I think the issue we got at the moment is that while we've got a lot of guys doing good things in the NBA, they're role players, whereas we used to go into an Olympic Games. Andrew Gaze may not have played in the NBA to any extensive level, but he would be coming out of the NBL scoring 35 points a game.
Yeah, that's right.
So he was kind of tuned to lead the assault that way. But certainly I'll be back him, wishing the best. They're well coached. They're a great bunch of guys. And if fortune favours them, they can do some great things again.
Well said, mate. That's great. Well, appreciate your time, mate. It's been a pleasure hearing your story and hearing your thoughts and insights. So, Damian Keogh, thank you for joining us on the More Than the Game podcast.
Thanks, Dan. Been a pleasure, mate.